I'm Zachary DeLongchamp, and I'm here with Mrs. Ann Wamser, and I'm interviewing her for the Milwaukee Memory Project along with my partner, Frank Spicuzza, and we are here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Wamser, for joining us. The first thing we're going to ask you is when and where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on December 21st, 1946.
What was your neighborhood like when you were growing up?
It was great. It was everybody knew each other, and you could sort of go to any house you wanted, and there was lots of kids in my neighborhood. It was a wonderful, wonderful neighborhood.
What neighborhood did you grow up in?
I don't know if it has a name. It was 53rd Street between Valete Street and Washington Boulevard.
What did you do for fun as a kid?
As a kid, Milwaukee had something that was absolutely wonderful. And I'm not sure if they still all do this today, but all the public schools had during the summer, they had coaches. They had one shift that worked from 9 until 2 and another shift from 2 until 9 at night. And they had a boys coach and a girls coach on each shift. And they had all kinds of games. They had little story hours for the little kids to volleyball tournaments for the big kids, and we had a bottle cap festival at the end of the summer that we saved our bottle caps for all year, and we worked on floats, and we could play checkers and chess, and they filled all summer long with activities. It was absolutely wonderful, and having a working mother, a single mother who worked, it was great. She knew that basically I was taken care of. You didn't have to get babysitters because you were just taken care of all day long.
What elementary and preschool did you go to?
I went to Niskara, which is the public school that I just mentioned, for for kindergarten. They didn't have preschool then. They had kindergarten. I went there for kindergarten, and that was about 3 blocks away from our house. And then when I started first grade, I went to St. Sebastian's Catholic School, which is on 55th and Washington Boulevard.
How did you get to school?
I walked.
You walked during for elementary as well to St. Sebastian's.
Yes.
And were your classmates your main friends throughout elementary school?
The classmates and my neighbors, the kids in the neighborhood.
Did they go to other schools?
Yes, some of them went to the public school, which was Steuben, and that was the junior high. I can't remember the name of the grade. Oh, and there was Niskara, and there was another grade school that some of them went to. But
Did you play any sports in elementary for your
yes,
school or for any other
yes,
club?
there was. I loved volleyball, and we played other schools, and like I remember sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we played volleyball. I loved volleyball. Um, I was captain of the team, and I was tall for my age. I got to be my full height of 5 feet 8 inches in like seventh grade. So I was that helped me in volleyball, and they also had softball after school. I played that, and that was during school. And then in the summer, you don't see these anymore for good reason, but on North Avenue, which was not too far away, when we got to be in junior high, they had trampoline courts where they would just have like 20 trampolines in a row, and they were built into the ground. I think they had some padding around them, but you could go trampolining for a half hour for 50 cents. And that was great. And the other thing we did was go ice skating. I loved to go ice skating. I would go every weekend, and every year for Christmas, all I wanted was ice skates because my feet grew so much. I had to have a new pair every year. And we'd go ice skating at Washington Park. They had a beautiful pavilion with food, and you could rent ice skates if you didn't have any. And they had just it was a beautiful ice skating rink there. And I'd go there all the time.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, but they were much older. They had a sister that was 5.5 years older and a brother that was 8 years older than I was.
How was your relationship with them? What was that like?
Well, they were so much older. We weren't on the same, you know, we didn't play together or anything like that. My sister actually had to babysit me because my grandma lived with us until I was 8. And when she died, then my sister was 14, and she had to babysit me a lot during the summer, and she didn't like that. So I'd just go to the playground and, you know, sort of stayed out of her way, and she was fine. But we weren't close friends at growing up because she was older, and she was in high school, and my brother got married when I was in 8th grade, right after 8th grade, the summer after 8th grade, and she got married when I was a junior in high school. So it wasn't like you have siblings where they're all the same age and you can do stuff together.
What did your parents do for work?
Well, my father was dead, and so my mother was a single mother, and we didn't have a car. So everywhere we went, we had to go on the bus, and she worked for Rex Chain Belt, and she had an office job, and because we didn't have a car, it wasn't real far away, but it was sort of difficult to get to on the bus, so she had to take 3 different buses to get to work and 3 different buses to get home. And in Wisconsin winters, that was pretty brutal sometimes. And finally, for the last maybe 8 years of her working life, a man from our parish who worked for Rex Chain Belt picked her up and drove her home. So she was lucky that way.
What was the house like that you lived in throughout, like while growing up? Did you move at all either?
No, we didn't move. It's called a Milwaukee bungalow, and that's a typical Milwaukee style home. And it had a front porch, and had a small living room, small dining room, small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on the first floor. And then on the second floor, there was a big attic, and there were 2 bedrooms up there, not in the attic, they were built out, but but you had to go through the attic to get to them. And it was kind of spooky because it was a spooky attic, I guess. And it was very hard to get people to stay overnight in grade school. The girls used to always stay at each other's house for overnight sleepovers. Nobody wanted to go from my attic. So, but it didn't bother me.
So you said you were friends with a lot of your neighbors. Do you think you had a generally tight-knit community?
Yes. A school community and a neighborhood community, yes.
What did your neighbors do for work, like the parents of your friends, do you know?
What did they do for
work?
Well, I know one neighbor worked at the brewery, and he had a gigantic potbelly. And I found out that they were able to drink beer while they were working on the line somehow. Whatever his job was, they could drink beer all day long. So he enjoyed his job. And I remember he would go down about 1.5, he had to go to the bus stop too. He would go down about one house away from where he lived, and he'd turn around and he'd wave to his wife every day. I thought that was so romantic.
Did most people take the bus?
No, most people did not have 2 cars, but I would say most people had 1 car. And but some people did not have any car, and it was very easy to get around in Milwaukee without a car, because I lived right between the Washington Boulevard bus line and the Valete Street bus line was a half a block away. The Washington Boulevard was a block and a half away. So it was very convenient. And we had the bus routes all memorized, and they had a little chart for us. So we always knew when the bus, we didn't have to wait 20 minutes. We'd go up, and they were always on time and dependable, and it worked out great. Only sometimes, though, in the winter, it was very cold. And sometimes I got on the wrong bus just to get out of the cold. And then sometimes I got lost. But if it was below 10 degrees below zero. Sometimes I would just get on the wrong bus just to warm up a little bit and try to figure out how to get home.
So you went to a Catholic elementary school at St.
Yes.
Sebastian. Was religion important to you or to your family at all?
Very important. That was the basis for our life, and it was extremely important. The nuns at the time wore the full black habit, and they were, for the most part, wonderful, except the nun I had in second grade was so old that we all worried that she would drop dead right in the classroom. But she didn't, and so, but we were all waiting for it because she must have been in her 80s. I mean, really, I don't know how she dealt with all of us, but she was fine. And I had one of my favorite teachers was Sister Ignatius Loyola in the 5th grade, and she thought we were all geniuses. We were all wonderful geniuses, and she was the best teacher, and she had us believing it for that year. Anyway.
So were all of your teachers nuns, or were there any lay people?
We had all nuns. We had one, Miss Loretta was my 3rd grade teacher, and she was wonderful. And she was my teacher right when my grandma died, and she knew I was coming home to an empty house. So she let me stay after school and help her clean the blackboards and all that. And she was so kind, and I will never forget her. And my only regret is that I didn't thank her more, because she was absolutely wonderful. And she just sensed that I needed a little more attention, and she gave it to me, and she was great.
How did being Catholic affect how you lived?
Well, I do remember vividly my first Holy Communion. That was a very special day. We processed in our white dresses from the school with the nuns, and we processed outside and into the church. And my mother took off of work a week beforehand and scrubbed and cleaned the whole house with my grandma, and they had a party. This is the first party I ever remember her having at our house. It was for my first Holy Communion, and my relatives came, and the biggest thrill was my godfather said, "I want to shake your hand," and he went to shake my hand, and there was a $5 bill in his hand. And I just thought that, I don't remember anything else from that day, but I remembered I thought I was rich, and it was a wonderful party and a wonderful day, and I just loved it. And then the other way, in confirmation, the same thing. And we had the bishop living at our parish, so there were always lots of priests. We had 4 assistants to the bishop, and there was always a traveling priest of some kind staying there. And we always had Mass every day before school started, and there was sometimes another priest saying Mass at one of the side altars, so there was like you had your choice of Masses to look at, and it was before Vatican II, so you sort of watched the Mass. You didn't participate, so you could watch whichever one you wanted. So the Mass was very integral to, and you couldn't eat anything before you went to communion, so we always brought a peanut butter sandwich to eat after Mass during the weekdays. And while we were eating our sandwich in the classrooms, the nuns would read us stories, read us out of books. So that was a treat, and confirmation was wonderful. And the only time that was a little hard was one of our neighbors and good friends, their daughter was getting married, and they were Lutheran. And my mother was invited to the wedding but was not allowed to go because it was not considered a sanctioned marriage unless you were married in the Catholic Church. She couldn't go to the wedding. She couldn't even give a gift or go to the bridal shower or anything. And that was sort of a crisis of sorts for our faith, because that just didn't seem like a very Christian thing to do. So that was, I remember that being a very traumatic thing. But the most traumatic thing for me was in 7th grade, my school, St. Sebastian's grade school, decided to build a new school. And they were afraid if they closed down the school for a year, that all the kids would go to the public school and they'd never get them back. So what they did instead was they didn't have any place to hold the school except the church and some of the little offices near the church. So what they did was the nuns took half the students in the morning from, I think it was like 7:30 in the morning till 1, and then the rest of the kids went in the afternoon from like 2 until 4. And they taught them in little groups inside the church. They put them in broom closets, the janitor's closet. They had us on the stairwell. They had, I don't know how these nuns did it. I went in the morning. I heard from the afternoon kids that the nuns were getting a little cranky. I don't blame them. I don't know if I could do that. It was a real challenge, but they got through that year, and we had a new school for our 8th grade. But it was very challenging. I don't think much learning took place in the 7th grade whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I can vouch for that. But we had a new school out of it, and that was wonderful. And then we did go. We all went to a Catholic high school, and my mother being a single mother, we couldn't afford to go to the Catholic high school. But it didn't seem like, we had Washington High School very close to our home, walking distance, and it just never came up as an option. Of course you go to the Catholic school, even though the Catholic school was way far away, and you had to take 3 different buses to get there, 3 different buses to get home, and we couldn't afford it. So my brother ended up painting the gym in his junior year, painting the gym at Pius High School. And that he earned from that, doing that, he earned his tuition and my sister's tuition. And then he had a paper route, and we all had jobs. And then when I started Pius, I worked in the cafeteria during my lunch hour, or during my study hall. Then after school, I cleaned the biology lab. And then I didn't have to pay any tuition. So, my mother always said, where there's a will, there's a way. And honestly, that is really true. The one thing I've learned, and I firmly believe, if you want something bad enough, you can't say, well, I can't afford that, or it's too far away, or if you want to do it, you can do it. You just have to figure out a way to do it. And she proved that to us time and time again. And so the Catholic faith was very important to us.
Going back to the grade school in St. Sebastian, how big was the graduating class?
The graduating class was huge, huge. There were 2 classes, and I think there was 59 in one class and 60 in the other. And I mean, with one nun, there were no volunteer helpers, or there were no aides, or there was no computers. There was a mimeograph machine that they printed stuff on that had a terrible smell. I remember that. But they had one nun in charge of 60 kids. And it was hard. It was very hard. We had a sweet nun in the 7th grade who came from St. Mary's Academy, which was an all-girls school, and she taught literature to seniors. Somehow they threw this poor nun into the 7th grade of this co-ed school. And I remember more than once her standing in front of the class and just tears streaming down her cheeks. She was like overwhelmed by us. And I still have guilty pangs for all the pranks we pulled on her.
Were most of your neighbors Catholic or religious at all? Or?
No. Well, I played with 2 girls that were one was a year older and one was a year younger, and they went to the Catholic school, but most of the neighbors were not Catholic.
Would they then go to the public school,
Mm-hmm.
local public school? And growing up, did you go on any vacations as a kid?
No. My mother, I don't remember her taking a vacation. She would take vacation days and then go work at the at the election sites as a poll worker to earn extra money. Or she, the one time before my first communion, she took a few vacation days and cleaned the house and got ready for the party. But she never took a vacation until I turned 11 years old. When I was 11, she had a friend in Flint, Michigan, whose husband had recently died, and they were friends growing up. So my first big trip was on the Greyhound bus to Flint, Michigan when I was 11. She wanted me to get me in before I turned 12 because then the price went up and I would be too expensive to take along. So we got that in right before I turned 12. But I was just fascinated by the Greyhound bus going through Chicago and those buildings, and we went to Flint, Michigan, and there were no kids to play with. There was this, of course, widow and her mother, who was, my mother was probably 55 at that time, and this other lady was 55, and then her mother was like 85, and me. So I had a ball that I remember hitting against the garage door for hours at a time, and then I had books. I always loved to read, so I would read books and have that ball, and I had a great vacation. I thought it was just wonderful. Had a great time.
So you said you went to Pius High School.
Yes.
What were your classes like at Pius?
They were pretty good, and pretty. They weren't as big as the other. As there was maybe 35 kids instead of 60 in a class, but it was a very large school. It had like 2,400. There was 600 in my freshman class alone, 610 in my freshman class alone. And the scariest thing is changing classes, because there were stairways that were going designated up stairways and stairways that go down. And if you went up the wrong stairway, I mean, you could literally be trampled to death. It was just like a swarm coming down the stairs. There was no going on the wrong way. It was a big school, and it was kind of overwhelming for a few weeks.
So because the classes were so big, what was the relationship like with your teachers?
In high school?
Yeah.
I don't recall a relationship with my teachers at all. I never once went to a guidance counselor, not one time. I never even knew where the guidance counselor office was. I didn't even know, maybe they didn't have one. I don't, I think they did, but I never even knew who it was. They weren't on a personal basis. It was so big that it was very impersonal. And they, I wanted to play volleyball, but because I had to work after school in the biology lab, I couldn't do that. And there were some other things I wanted to join. So sometimes we had Gillis's. That was this ice cream stand where I met my future husband when I was a junior. But sometimes kids wanted to go there after school, and my friends would sometimes come and help me clean the biology room. They didn't even have to. And then we could go to I could go with them to Gillis's to get an ice cream.
What would you guys do for fun? Was it Gillis's, and what else would you guys do?
We had so much fun. On Friday nights, it was always a football game or basketball game. And if it wasn't that, then usually on Saturday nights or Friday, I can't remember, they had a CYO dance, Catholic Youth Organization. You had to have a card that you had to pay $1 for. And then you could go to these dances for 50 cents. And the dances were great. They were like all sock hops, because they were in gyms at different schools, and they coordinated it so it wasn't, two at one time. It was always, they took turns throughout the parishes, throughout the city. The best ones were St. Pius Grade School, because they had like a skating rink, and I think they used that for the sock hop, and Marquette High School. Theirs were really good. And Then there were some that were kind of lame. St. Jude's had good ones, and St. Rita's on the south side had good ones. But um, they were packed. High school kids were just packed in there. And they always had DJs. They didn't have live music, but they had good DJs and loud music, and it was great.
So there were kids from all
the different schools, all the high schools. You had to be in high school, and you had to have a CYO card that you paid $1 for.
Were there any rivalries going on between school versus school?
I'm sure there were, especially between Marquette and Pius, because, just in sports, that was the big rivalry. There was a lot of good sports teams.
So you said you met your future husband at Gillis's.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, he had been in a very serious motorcycle accident, and they thought he would die, actually, and then they thought he would be in a wheelchair, and then he kept overcoming, and then they thought he would walk with a limp, and he was rehabbing for months and months and months from this motorcycle. He crushed both of his legs. So on the day that he no longer needed his cane, he went from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane, and the day he no longer needed his walker, he walked over to Gillis's, and he was walking. I was with my friend Karen, and her boyfriend's parents, and my future husband's parents were very good friends. So she said, "Hi, Tom," and he came over, and she introduced us. And then she went off with her boyfriend or whatever, and I just talked to him, and we were going to be seniors. It was right after my junior year, and I remember, we're all saying, where are you going to college and all that? What are you thinking about? And he always struck me as different, because he looked at college as like a necessary evil. He really wanted to start working, and he said, well, he wasn't excited at all about college. But I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to have my own business. And even then, he wanted to have his own business, and he thought farther in the future than just the next year where you're going to apply or where you're going to go to college. And I always thought that made him seem so much older than he was, and made all the other boys my age look like babies.
Did you go to, were you in high school like during the time of the Vietnam War?
It was just starting. It was a terrible thing, and it was so undefined. It wasn't ever called a war. It wasn't declared a war. I don't think ever. But it was a war. So it was so ambiguous and disturbing, and one of the young men I dated in high school went and was killed. He went from the Air Force Academy right to Vietnam and was killed several years later. And it was just so tragic.
So you said you met your future husband at Gillis's, and you explained the story of how you guys met. What kind of dates would you guys go on together?
Well, dating, there were rules about dating when we were in high school that they don't seem to apply anymore. I don't know what happened to them, but it was very important that the young man who would take you on a date come to your house, ring the doorbell. He would come in and meet your mother or your parents, and they would tell your parents where he was taking you and what time you'd be home. And it was very clear. Everybody was on the same page. And my first date with my future husband, Tom, was we went to a parade for Labor Day, I guess, Labor Day. It's the Labor Day parade. And we went with another couple, and it was in the afternoon. And because he hadn't been able to work at all for several months because he was in the hospital and so forth. He didn't have any money. So he was so afraid that his friend was going to say, well, let's go out for pizza, or because it was getting to be about 5 o'clock, or let's go get a burger at Gillis's or something. He was so afraid, and he didn't have any money, and apparently they didn't work this out beforehand. So he looked at me and he said, are you getting hungry? And I go, sure, I'm getting hungry. And he took me home so fast. I was at my doorstep and he said goodbye. That was it. He wanted to drop me off before I got too hungry because he didn't have any money to feed me. But the next date I went on was better. It was his sister's wedding, and he didn't have to pay for that either, but I did get fed. And so he was in the wedding, and I was at a table with Karen and my friends. But usually dates were either homecoming dances and proms and all that, or you went to the school play, or you went out to a movie, or you went to a drive-in movie, or there were parties at people's houses in their rec rooms. But you always, if you went to a party, it was with a group. But if you went on a date, the date always had to come to the door. You introduced him to your mother, and it was always very respectful. And you got home when you said you were going to be home. And I always told my dates that I had to be home at a certain time, even though my mother was so exhausted. She was sound asleep by 9 o'clock at night. She never knew when I got home. But I always said, oh, I got to be home at 11. She's going to be real mad if I don't get home by 11.
So you said you go to homecoming and prom and other dances as, a date. How was that, and what were those dances like? And for prom, did you guys make signs like they do today to ask, or how would you ask them to?
No, there was no fancy cookies or anything. They just called you up and said, "Do you want to go to prom?" And that was it. So, yeah, it was. They just called you up. You want to do this? You want to do? And I had a rule. I had a Wednesday rule. If somebody would call me after a Wednesday to go out on a Friday or Saturday night, I would say, no, I'm sorry, I can't. Because I thought, they need to call me before Wednesday. If they're going to call me on Thursday to go out on a Friday, no, that's a no-go. I thought, well, he's got to learn to step up a little earlier.
How would you guys, communicate with each other?
Well, we did have phones. We're not that old.
Right. Through landline and...
Oh, yeah, landline. And we had one phone in the kitchen. And when I got into high school, my mother decided we had a party line where you had different people could, listen to your conversation. And if they wanted to make a call, then they'd slam the phone down. And, they would get all upset because they wanted to. So it was hard to have a conversation. And when she knew that I was starting high school, I was talking a lot. Then we got a private line. So what I would do is I would take the phone in the kitchen, had a real long cord that we completely stretched out, and I would take it into the steps going up to our attic so I could sit on the attic steps and have a private conversation.
Transferring over to early adulthood, did you go to college?
Yes, I went to UWM, and I had no idea it was so close to the lake because I took the bus, and it was west of the lake, but I never got to the lake, and I didn't realize until I had a car later on that, oh my gosh, we're on the east side, it's real close to the lake. But I went to UWM for a year, and I liked it, and I took an art was always my favorite subject. I took art classes in high school and art classes in college, and plus all the basics. And I joined a sorority, and I worked at the bookstore at UWM, and then I'd get up on Sunday mornings and work from 6 to 2 at Moyer's Bakery. I'd go to 5:30 Mass at St. Sebastian's, and then I'd run down, leave right after communion, and run down 2.5 blocks to Moyer's Bakery and check in right at 6 o'clock. But I was very busy, and all that bus riding and everything, I was very, very busy.
Did you live in the dorms?
Oh, no.
You said you took the bus.
No, we took the bus. We lived at home. There was no question about it. And my mother said, I can pay for your room and board, but you've got to figure out tuition, books, clothing, your bus pass. And because my father had died, I got $25 a month in Social Security. So out of that, I bought my bus pass and gave me, I think it's probably about $5 for a bus pass every week. So at least I could get there. And then with my other jobs, I could buy clothes and my spending money. So.
What was it like to be in a sorority at that time?
The sorority had very strict rules. You could not wear long pants, or you definitely could not wear jeans of any kind. That was like, considered just awful. And we're talking taking buses. I think I had to take 2 or 3 to get to UWM in the winter, and you couldn't have anything on your legs. I mean, you didn't. My mother kept saying, I don't know why you don't wear your snow pants. And I go, Mother, I can't wear my snow pants. I was much too embarrassed to wear snow pants, but you had bare legs in the winter, and you couldn't wear jeans, you couldn't wear warm-up pants. There was no such thing as that. So you had to dress properly all times. And
are you still friends with any of your sorority sisters?
Not really, because I only went 1 year. So I know a couple, and I run into them every once in a while. And Diane Zor, as a matter of fact, I've run into a lot, and we've become friendly after many years of not seeing each other, and she's lovely.
Did most of your friends go to college? Like, was going to college from high school? Like, was going to college expected?
Yes, most of my friends, my friend Karen didn't, but almost all my other friends did. But there was never a talk of going away to school. It was like UWM or Marquette or Mount Mary or something. It was all local. I don't know of anybody who went out of state or even out of the city to go to college.
How long did you work at the bakery and the bookstore?
For the bakery, my whole year in college at UWM.
Did you enjoy working there?
Oh, and I worked at the bakery even before that. Yeah, I did. I mean, the bookstore was really kind of nice. You had to work and check people in before school started because everybody had all these books that they had to buy. But then the other part, they put me in the little post office in the bookstore where, occasionally somebody would come and buy stamps, or I'd have to weigh something or whatever. But the rest of the time I could study. So that was actually a very good job.
So you worked a lot of jobs throughout high school and throughout your life. What was your first career job?
My first career job was when I left school sophomore year. I got a job at Northwest Airlines, and I sort of did this on the spur of the moment. I started school, and then I just decided I wanted to work for the airlines and travel, because I had never really traveled anywhere. So I requested an application from Northwest Airlines, and they sent it, and I got the reply to come to Minneapolis for an interview. And I got the reply on Wednesday, and it said, come anytime at your convenience before, and it was the following Monday. So I had to go, I think I got the letter on Thursday. I had to go on Friday. And I had never been on an airplane before. I didn't even know how to get to the airport on the bus. So I took the bus real early in the morning down to the Pfister Hotel, and I got the shuttle from the Pfister Hotel to the airport, and I got on this plane all by myself, and I was probably 19, and got to Minneapolis and found my way to this place where I interviewed, and I had very bad feet, and it was very hard for me to walk any distances. So I knew I couldn't be a stewardess, as they called them at that time, but I wanted to be working so I could get they had good benefits. You could get, free flights and all that. So I applied to be a reservation sales agent. And they told me on Friday that I got the job and I was to report Monday morning in 3 days in Minneapolis. And I had to come Sunday, so because they started the training on Monday. So I had to fly back Sunday and start this so I had to quit school, I had to quit my jobs, I had to quit the sorority all on Saturday, and then I had to fly back out. I mean, my head was like spinning, and my mother didn't know what I was doing. I said, I think I want to quit college. And, she just was very good about it. She just didn't, okay. And I went back there, and there was 3 weeks of training, and then you could go any city you want. And I always thought I would come back to Milwaukee because they had 4 openings in Milwaukee, and you could go to whatever city you wanted all over the country. You go to Anchorage, you could go to, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, New York, Atlanta. You could go Chicago, anywhere you wanted, and it was depended on your rank in class. So I made sure I was at the very top of my class. I think I was number 2, and I got my choice of cities, and I was going to go back to Milwaukee, and then I met these other young girls, and we all said, let's go to New York City. So I thought, well, that sounds very good. So we all went to New York. There was 10 of us that went to New York City. And then I came home 3 weeks later on a Friday. I had to pack up on Saturday, and on Sunday I flew to New York City and to start my job. And I didn't know anybody in the city. Came with my one suitcase. All I kept doing was looking up at the skyscrapers, going, oh my goodness. And I stayed at the YMCA the first night, or YWCA. And then we reported at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, and they gave us a crash course on how to behave in New York City. They told us, do not look up at the skyscrapers with your mouth hanging open. It looked like a green know-nothing person from a small town. So I tried to not do that, and then we had to, and it was just a perfect job for me at that time. It was just great. I loved it. I advanced quickly to, the top flight desk, and then I was asked to be one of 5. This was an office of like 160 people. One of 5 at the Imperial top flight desk, where we took care of celebrities and top corporations, and we got taken out for lunch sometimes, or dinner, and it was a great experience learning how to be a responsible business person. And I got roommates, and we got an apartment, and it was a wonderful experience. I got to travel immediately. The first trip I took was with another friend to, after 3 months, because you were on probation for 3 months, we went to Hawaii, stopped over in her city in Seattle, and met her family, and she lived on a horseback riding farm, and it was just eye-opening to me. We went, in that year that I was in New York, I traveled all over Europe, all on free passes. And the nice thing about this job is you were staggered. Sometimes you had 3-day weekends and then you had to work 6 days in a row. Sometimes you had 2-day weekends and worked 5 days in a row. So you could trade the days in between your 2-3-day weekends, and you'd have like 2 weeks of vacation. Then you had to work for that person on one of your days off. But basically you could have 2 weeks of free vacation days every like 3 months, 3 or 4 months, to go on all these trips. And it was a wonderful thing, especially for me not having traveled at all.
What was flying like at this time, and what was the Milwaukee airport like?
Well, I don't remember the Milwaukee airport being anything special, but flying was special. Nobody schlepped on board in their flip-flops and shorts and sweatshirt. No, that everybody got dressed up. It was an event. It was very expensive. It was regulated. It was very, very expensive. And because we worked in reservations and we were selling these seats, they wanted us to experience first class. Because how can you sell it if you don't experience it? So I was okay with that. And every time there was room available, if you were going as a non-revenue passenger, every time there was room available, they always put you in first class, always. And it was unbelievable. I mean, you started off with a drink, an alcoholic drink, before you even left the runway. You had a drink in your hand. And then they didn't have any, videos or entertainment on board, iPhones or iPads or any of that, TVs. So they entertained you by feeding you these elaborate 7-course dinners or lunches. The food was absolutely amazing in first class. You had a tablecloth over your tray, and you had fresh flowers, you had a little salt and pepper shaker, and you had stemmed glassware for your wine. You had a choice of red wine or white wine or champagne, and then they served all these courses, and then they gave you drambuie afterwards, or cordials. I mean, it was amazing. It sure beat the Greyhound bus going to Flint, Michigan. Oh my goodness. I was just shocked at that there was any such thing like this available.
How would you say Milwaukee compared to New York City at the time?
Well, there's really no comparison whatsoever. I mean, Milwaukee was a wonderful place, especially to, grow up in and get around and everything. But New York was just so cosmopolitan and so different, and it's so vibrant in a different way, and a little bit dangerous. There was always a element of danger, and it was just so much more of everything. It was very exciting to live in New York.
Did you ever move back to Milwaukee afterwards?
Yes, after about a year, I transferred back to the Milwaukee reservation office because Tom and I broke up the year right before I moved to New York. We got in a big fight, and I decided to move to New York. So then after a year, he started writing me again. So I came back, and then that was, so I was back after that, and then we started going out again.
Why did you decide to move back to Milwaukee?
For Tom, probably, yeah.
And then when did you get married?
We got married in 1970, in January 24th, 1970, and I was working for the airlines, and he got a job in sales for a printing company. I think it was a printing company.
Where was the wedding?
The wedding was at St. Sebastian's, my home parish, and the reception was at the Boulevard Inn, which was right on Lloyd Street and 47th Street at that time. And we could just afford a luncheon. And it was an 11 o'clock wedding, followed by a little luncheon at the Boulevard Inn. We didn't have any dancing or big reception or anything like that. Just a little luncheon.
Who paid for the wedding?
We did. Actually, we both had Volkswagens. Mine was new and he bought a used Volkswagen. So he sold his car to pay for our wedding. And as we were getting engaged, I would pay along the way I paid for the invitations, and I paid for the wedding cake, and I paid for my dress, and I paid for all the incidentals along the way out of my paycheck, and he paid for the whole wedding dinner and everything by selling his car. So we had no money when we got married.
Did you guys go on a honeymoon?
Well, that's the good part about working for the airlines, because we went on a honeymoon basically for free. I think there was a service charge for the tickets, nonstop from Chicago to Honolulu, and first class, and that was Tom's first time on an airplane, and I'll never forget, as we were getting on the plane, he said, "Can I sit by the window?" Because he had never been on a plane before, and I had been traveling by that time a lot. So he sat by the window, and we just were, amazed at what a wonderful trip that was.
Did you guys have any children?
We do have children. We have 2 daughters.
And where were you guys living when you had your 2 daughters?
Well, we had a very small house in West Dallas on 104th Street in Schlinger. It was very, very small house. When we first got married, we lived in an upper flat near St. Sebastian's, and then we found this little house that was our goal, is to have a house before we had children, because I didn't want to work after we had children. I wanted to stay home with the babies, and we knew that it would be hard to save up for a down payment if we had babies right away. So we waited 3 years to have children, and during that time we saved all of my paycheck completely. And that's the thing, you can really do that if you, right from the beginning, when you get married, if you just live on one paycheck. And people get married and they say, "Oh, we've got 2 paychecks now and we can spend even more." But then you can never get ahead, you can never have the choice of whether you stay home or not to care for your children. Then you're wrapped into the 2 paycheck situation, and that doesn't ever go away. But if you start from the day one just on one paycheck, then you just get used to it. And you need a stove, you need a refrigerator, but it doesn't have to be new. Get an old one for $25, and that's what we did. We got old stuff and made it work, and then we could save all of my 100% of my paychecks. So then we had, in a few years, we had time for money to buy a house.
Did you guys move at all while your kids were growing up, or did you stay in West Dallas?
We did. So we moved to Mequon, and then Tom got laid off right as we moved in. So then we were strapped for money, and that didn't work out. So we sold that house and we moved to Wauwatosa. And by that time, he found a job, and I could still stay home. It was a less house than we had in Mequon, so it all worked out for the best.
So your husband, Mr. Wamser, he wanted to create his own company, you said. How did you feel about him wanting to start his own?
Well, it was very scary because you have to sign a personal guarantee, and we took out a second mortgage on our house. And I kept saying, "Oh my goodness, it was very scary." I didn't like that, and the only way that I could do it is I didn't want him to ever be, in his late 60s or 70s and said, I wish I would have started my own business, or I wish I would have had my own business. And he said to me, he was 34 when he wanted to go into business for himself, and he said, if it doesn't work out, I'm young enough to start over. Where, if you wait too long, you're not going to take the chance when you're in your 50s or 60s to start a business. It's just way too risky. You don't have time to recover if it doesn't work out. So that's what I did. I just said, you're right. If it doesn't work out, you're still young enough, you can do something else.
And so he ended up starting his own company. Which company he started?
That was called Protea. No, it was Vulcan Technology. Vulcan Technology. It was a metal fabricating company. And he first thing they did is they found this plant to have this operation in, and then they got a truck, and he had to go all over the Midwest in closeout sales or liquidation sales and get all the equipment to use for the manufacture of these parts and so forth. So he was sort of like coming home with these huge pieces of metal things. It's a good thing they didn't tip over. I mean, it was very scary. Everything was very scary when he did this.
So he started with Vulcan, and then he soon bought Beck Carton.
Yes.
Correct. And where was Beck Carton located?
That was located in the 3rd Ward of Milwaukee.
What was the 3rd Ward like at this time?
It was a barren warehouse district, sort of seedy and run down, and it wasn't in a good neighborhood. But it was, right after he bought it, it just seemed to start to change. And he bought it with his brother-in-law and his father as minority partners, and then in a few years he bought them both out. So anyway, it was kind of scary neighborhood too. But when he first started going there, and one man who had a business about a block away brought his wife down, and there was no other residential buildings or condos or any of that. And she went on the top of his roof and she said, this would be a beautiful place for a condo. And he thought, yeah. So they were ready, their kids had grown and they were ready to give up their home in, I think, Brookfield. So they built this beautiful condo. I think it was his name was Jack Gardner, I think. He brought this beautiful condo that he built on top of his business, and that sort of like started people thinking, oh my goodness, could be a neat place here. And then a few other people started building out, condos and in their buildings, and slowly there was a change in the 3rd Ward over many years, and it was really interesting to see. It was it turned into this desolate, isolated, sort of junky warehouse section south of Milwaukee into what it is today, which is a vibrant arts community where they have theaters and restaurants and condos and all kinds of art things going on, and it's just a wonderful renaissance of that area that I was fortunate enough to witness with my husband buying this business on the corner of Chicago, and it was just wonderful.
He bought another company in the 5th Ward, correct?
Yes, he had other buildings to support. One was raw material, one was finished material, and he had warehousing for parts, and he did it expanded to the 5th Ward.
What was the 5th Ward like? Was that also?
It had a renaissance of sorts, from a warehouse district, but not as much or as vibrant as the Third Ward. That really, really was a tremendous growth and expansion, and just blossomed into this wonderful place.
I understand one of the ways that you helped rejuvenate the Third Ward was by hosting festivals.
Well, the people at the beginning, they have a festival. It morphed into a jazz festival, but at first it was just, let's get all together and get to be a neighborhood. And the businesses would come down, and they would have office chair races in the middle of the streets on Chicago and Milwaukee streets, and they'd have food and entertainment and bands, and it was just a way to build neighborhood and build community, and it hadn't any community before, so it was wonderful. It was wonderful to see. And we had a little food stand in front of Beck Carton. We'd sell watermelon and all of that, and our daughters were working there, and I was working there, and then my husband had a car collection in the old firehouse, and sometimes he would open the doors and people would flood in there to see his car collection, and it was and we used that old firehouse for a lot of charity events, and it was a wonderful place.
How long do you think it took for the Third Ward to rejuvenate?
Well, once it gets sort of slow to start, but then once it got going, I would say 10 to 20 years, it was completely turned around.
Were there any other companies involved in helping to revitalize the community?
Well, there was the Historic Third Ward Association, which brought all of the companies in that area together and increased the number of companies, and Tom was president of that entity for a few years, as other leaders in that area were. And he also was president of the TIF district, which once they got the financing for through the TIF district, they could do all of the streetscaping and all of the landscaping that is there today. It used to be just sort of like bad roads around there. Now they're beautiful roads where you can sit and they have the parking in the middle, and they've done a lot as far as the parking structure and just the landscaping and the streetscaping to provide a welcoming place for businesses to come, and they came. The carton on the first floor, they made it into a beautiful shop called the Private Gardener, and that was for many years a wonderful flower shop and gardening expertise. And across the street, the Posners, they had an art gallery, and then they built a beautiful condo on top of the art gallery, and it just sort of took off. It was wonderful.
So while this is all going on, did you guys stay living in Mequon, or did you move?
No, we moved to Brookfield. We only stayed in Mequon for a short time. Then we moved to Wauwatosa, and then we moved to Brookfield. So we were in Brookfield most of the time when he was in the Third Ward.
Out of all the neighborhoods you lived in Milwaukee and in Brookfield and wherever else, what was your favorite neighborhood, and what were the differences or similarities?
I liked Wauwatosa the best after we were married, living in a place where they had sidewalks. I didn't understand the importance of sidewalks until we didn't have them, like in Mequon or Brookfield. I missed the sidewalks and be able to walk to the grocery store or the drugstore, or to be able to walk places. That's where I really love that kind of living situation the best.
So I understand that after a while, your husband moved the companies from Milwaukee to Franklin.
Yes, he actually wanted to. He wanted to consolidate. He had all these warehouses and different buildings all over the Third and the Fifth Ward, and he wanted to consolidate the operation into one facility that you bring in the raw material and it would go through all the different processes into folding cartons, and then it would come out the other way, and it would all be a big circle, and it would be a very competent way to and cost-saving way to run his business. It was getting too big and too spread out, and he had too many different buildings, and there was so much time going up and down elevators moving the material around. So he was looking for a place to have a big facility built, and there was a new office park or situation in the Menominee River Valley that was from it was from Milwaukee County was developing this, and he wanted to buy two lots in there, huge lots, and develop it into a huge campus. And actually, he was very disappointed with Milwaukee County. They weren't responsive to him. It took so many calls to get answers to questions. They weren't. He wanted some easements of to make two big plots together. They didn't want to do that. They were very uncooperative and that was very surprising to Tom, because he thought they'd want to sell these plots and get this thing off the ground, and there was nobody there that was very helpful. So what he did is he inquired about the park in Franklin, the business office park in Franklin, and they could not have been better. And they, he told them what he wanted to do. He wanted to take these two big plots. He wanted to take out the road in between it and make it one big campus. And at first they didn't want to, and then somebody in the back said, well, if you take out the road, you can make that back in taxes in 2 years or 3 years or whatever it was. And so they said, oh yeah, Milwaukee was very short-sighted and uncooperative. Franklin was very good, very cooperative, could see the bigger picture. And so he built the plants in Franklin instead of Milwaukee. His first choice was Milwaukee. That's where the employees, were more comfortable with and closer to their things. So that was a loss for Milwaukee, because they didn't step up in the way that he needed. So he built these two big plants in Franklin, Wisconsin, one for the folding carton business and one for the contract packaging business. And that worked out very well.
So beyond being a wonderful mother and wife and homemaker, what did you do that brought you joy and enrichment throughout?
Well, when the children were young, I wanted to finish my degree, and that was very important to me. So I started going to school, taking one class a semester, and I remember going to school with somebody who had young children too, and she was going full-time, and I said, how can you go full-time to school? She says, well, I just have to put my kids on hold for 4 years and get it done. And I thought, I am not going to do that. I would rather take one class a semester and just plug along and just really enjoy that one class, but also be able to really enjoy and raise my children, which was my number one priority. So that's what I did. I went to school and took one class a semester for years. I graduated from Mount Mary College, which is now Mount Mary University. I graduated in my early 40s. And what also brought me joy is art has always been a part of my life that has brought me joy, and I always in the back of my mind wanted to be a docent at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And it was a wonderful time. I got into a great docent class, and it's a big commitment to be a docent at the Milwaukee Art Museum. You have to go at least twice a week, for training on their collection and also on training on more art history in general. And then you have to go, in addition, you have to practice giving tours, and you have to create tours, And then after you do the training for 2 years, then you actually have to give tours and continue ongoing training. And I loved it. I loved the school children. Sometimes they would go to the orchestra, see the orchestra piece in the morning, and then you would coordinate what kind of music they listened to what kind of art they saw in the afternoon after they had lunch. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience for me, and especially toward the end, Santiago Calatrava was hired to put the new building in, and he came many times to talk to the docents. So we got a really interesting, amazing Renaissance man to teach us what he was doing and why and how. And so I remember going to dinners with him, among lots of other people, as they're trying to raise money for this event. And we were lucky to be able to contribute to the wonderful addition to the art museum that he created. And I'll never forget the opening of the new addition to the art museum. It was right after 9/11. So it was like in October. 9/11 happened, of course, in September. And everybody was so depressed after 9/11. And we didn't even realize how depressed we were until we had this opening. We went across the street from the art museum. And what happened was Santiago Calatrava was there, and he gave the most beautiful, inspirational speech on why we needed art and beauty in this world now more than ever before, because of 9/11, because of the things. We have to cancel out the evil with something good. And he made the most beautiful, beautiful speech. And at the end of that, there was like smoke coming from the ground. It just, right in front of the art museum, it was like that smoke somehow. And they have trumpets announcing the opening of it. And then they had the big wings from the art museum started to open amid these trumpets blaring, and they had the music from an orchestra playing, and then they had silver and gold fireworks blasting up from the opening wings of this magnificent structure. It was truly what we all needed in that moment of grief and sadness. It was so uplifting, and it was so beautiful. And then everybody, after the fireworks were over and the trumpets, and they still had the classical music playing, we walked across the bridge into this beautiful dinner that was all in black tablecloths, and the dinner was wonderful, and they even had white chocolate wings of the brie soleil on the dessert. I mean, it was just a magical moment for the city of Milwaukee, and for the people that needed that at that time. It was such a great, great experience, and a wonderful tribute to Milwaukee. I was so proud to be a Milwaukeean.
You said the ceremony was right outside the...
It was right outside. We were across the street from the art museum, and that's where the speeches were, and the smoke was on the ground, the trumpets, the brise soleil opened up, and the fireworks. It was amazing.
That just about concludes our Making of Milwaukee project. Thank you very much,
You're
Mrs.
welcome.
Ann Wamser. And that does it. Thank you.